I've got my laptop for quick research.
I'm using my laptop as my laptop stand. So,
nice.
Yeah.
Oh, hang on. Connecting.
Oh, there we go.
We're in.
We're live. Yeah.
There we go. What a treat. Ranjit Saimbi, the haphazard.
That's me. That is me. Very haphazard.
So yeah, I mean, this is funny because we're not like doing an interview, but I feel like we can introduce ourselves anyway. It's just like, yeah, so I'm Ben. I'm like writing. I make book content. I do a Substack every week. The Outlier. It's been going for ages now, and I set it up to sort of do my first book, Fringes, and it's kind of become its own thing. I'm going to be doing a lot more of it this year, and me and Ranjit made friends online.
As you do these days. So yeah, I'm Ranjit. I'm probably less prolific than Ben is on the internet. In fact, I know I am. I'm currently writing a novel, getting towards sort of the end game of writing said novel. I've got a Substack called The Haphazard, which essentially is, I guess, like it's a bit of a writing playground for when I just cannot be bothered with my novel, or it's just like doing my head in. And yeah, we've known each other for a while now.
It's actually pretty funny. Have you had to like explain me to your friends yet? Like there's one of like, you and my other friend Ant who you've met. It was I went to his birthday maybe 2 years ago, and it was one where his friends were like, "Oh, you're a real person."
It just comes off as super weird, doesn't it? It's like, yeah, so I was in this like online community and I met this guy called Ben, and like he used to play rugby, and it's just none of it hangs together.
It's one of those where it's like, don't look at it too long. It just
Yeah.
gets weird. But
Yeah.
I think what I like about your Substack as well is that I think it is that playground aspect, but also that the things you put out there, they're much more focused than mine. I'm always very envious of like, mine's a bit of a kind of roundup, so it's got sort of little musings on like, 3 or 4 different things, which I think people like, but then, you're always sort of envious of the things that other people are doing. And I always like, that you come at something quite randomly out of nowhere and then it's with quite a coherent piece. And I'm like, oh, like, there he is, and you just get this little email pop in. It's great.
Yeah. No, but then at the same time, like I think conversely, I mean, my one's entirely kind of obeys the whims of just like my life and like when I get time. I've got like a huge ream of topics that I'm always kind of vaguely interested in, and so when I get time, I try to like build it out into something a bit more coherent. But I like the reliability of your Substack.
Let's be fair though, you're doing like a real job as well. So
Oh yeah, I'm doing a job. Yeah.
So it's not super easy. But I know what you mean. You have these things circling your head where you're like, oh yeah, I've got 3 or 4 thoughts like cohering around that. But then I've also got this, and I've also got this like long-term project. And then in the end, you can, if you're not careful, like everything can evade you. Like what? So I don't know. I suppose I'd be interested in what is the tipping point for you to be like, right, I'm actually going to like finish writing about it now, because I think so many writers, I know I do, keep these like stubs of articles or ideas and they just never go anywhere. So I suppose that, what's the tipping point for you?
Oh, mate. I think probably it's less about, it's probably how strongly I feel about a stub, really. And it's quite circumstantial and a bit kind of intuitive. Like there's not that much to it in a way. Like I think that when I sort of gather enough stubs that they tend to be a bit coherent. Like at the moment, for example, I was listening to that massive Churchill biography that I was telling you about, right? And so the ideas that, and it's a massive biography, like 40-hour listen on Audible. I've got 10 hours to go.
Does he narrate it?
No. Well, not biography either. That's totally wrong. It's just a history book, right? It's just a history, about his life. But he, like the ideas that started like jumbling around my mind ended up being like ideas around like destiny, like Churchill's sense of destiny, and like when you're listening to a biography for like that long, a book about someone for that long, invariably what happens is that like you start magpieing for other ideas that support some of those points. So now I've started reading like David Deutsch, Beginnings of Infinity, and even though it's like hugely scientific laws of physics explaining the world, etc., etc., I've just started reading like a chapter on optimism, and he's coming at it from like a totally different perspective from, say, Churchill, right? But actually, they're these like weird echoes that I'm finding all over the place. So I think it's just more like enough of those happen, and I gather enough of those little shards that I'm like, yeah, cool. I actually want to join these pieces and not have them just sort of float about in my head, and so that they could just disappear into nothingness.
It can be. I sometimes think it's a bit like when you go and see a band live. There's a point with bands sometimes, and this is not everybody's experience, but sometimes it's like the capstone to my relationship with that band, and then once I see them live, I almost never listen to them again. It's like it's like I've been listening to you for ages. I've like done this album, done that album, whatever it is, and then I go and see them, and it's like it's like the pinnacle of our relationship, and then I just kind of go, oh, I feel like I don't need to listen to you anymore, or now I know you live, like it feels like we're over.
Yeah. Completed it. Completed that thought. Good. Yeah.
But I think the other thing is, I find it, sometimes I'm like, there's certain ideas where I think I need to do the most comprehensive piece ever on this topic. So, I've been doing this boys literacy project, as you know. So I'm going to schools talking to like teenagers basically about why they should read books, and because I think the messenger is like like rugby, like big jock, like it's like read a book, and then so they don't quite know what to think about it, but it seems to cut through like a bit. It has a kind of weird power to it, but I've had this piece, where I'm like, I must write this sort of piece about this work, and then it feels like I'll probably never do it. So I have given myself a sort of hard deadline that I've not told anyone about yet. But actually, no, I have told a couple of people about it. But it's I think you can try and be too what's the word I want to use? Too comprehensive. Like you can too completionist, can't you? And it's like one thing can easily be three pieces, but you don't need.
It especially happens, I think, when you want to write about something that just has like insane amounts of depth as well, and like you can just. There are so many tangents that you could go down. Like I have that coding course that I do that's like uniquely different to any coding course I've ever done. It's called Watch and Code, and like its methodology and the founders and like the pedagogy. In some ways, like it's so simple, but it's so deep. But I wonder if this is the same with the boys' literacy thing, because that tangent on. There's so many ways that you can write something like that as well. Like you could be anecdotal, you could talk about the characters involved, like you could talk about like the purpose of literature. Like that's like a massive topic,
I think there are a couple of people on Substack who do that quite well, but I think if anything, they maybe tend, for me, or for maybe like the broader world, they tend too academic. I think like if you're not careful, you can kind of write for the Substack circle only, maybe, or you almost for things to kind of resonate with more people, they do need to be simpler, I think, or they need to have the kind of elements of fiction, which I think you obviously are a blended writer. There are things you write that are like commentary, and they're a little bit more based on these kind of thinkers. But then you're actually writing fiction, which I've kind of dabbled with, but I feel like when I read yours, I'm a little bit like, oh, this feels like much more realized. I feel like I'm still tickling. To me, not non-fiction feels much more straightforward. And having done it a couple of times, I mean, obviously, it's like once you've done something, it becomes commensurately sort of less difficult in your mind. But yeah, I don't know. Like, what is the novel? What is the novel? What is yours? What's the idea, if you want to?
Yeah. So it's about two brothers with like a big age gap, and they're essentially living in the aftermath of, I guess, like a terrible disaster, which is that their father's just died. But prior to that, their mother had just died. So now it's just the two of them kind of untethered in the world. And the older brother is like a workaholic lawyer, and the younger brother is just a choir boy at St. Paul's. And essentially, it is about, I guess, like not coming to terms with this new reality that they find themselves in. And weirdly, it sounds a bit like Sally Rooney's Intermezzo.
I don't want to say it.
Yeah, I know, right?
But I do know that you've been working on this for longer than that book's been out. So there is that.
Weirdly, like I did, as part of writing, I ended up getting accepted onto, I guess, a program for sort of like, I don't know, debutante novelists, people yet to be published, run by Hatchards. And that was really cool. And one of the best exercises was actually trying to like boil down your novel idea so that you can actually give people a synopsis. Because when I started writing it, like I used to be a lawyer. I'll just put that out there. And I saw sort of like workaholism like firsthand. And so when I started writing it, I thought, oh gosh, I want to write about like work addiction. Like I find that like really, really fascinating. What work is this sort of like displacement action that people seem to be doing. And you and I have talked about like work and purpose, and I think those ideas are kind of, they're in the air. But then the novel ended up really being about the relationship between these two brothers and grief, actually, and like the realignment of their lives. So yeah, like I don't know. I'm getting towards the end of it. Second draft. I'm at the 70,000 word count. Probably another 10, 15 to go. I think I've got some words from the first draft that I could still deploy and finesse a bit. So it's quite exciting, actually.
Yeah, no, it's really exciting. I think that's something that people, I think, misunderstand as well sometimes, is that like there is the odd writer that appears to go like end to end, but actually it's a much choppier, in my experience, much choppier process than like, oh, I started at the beginning and I wrote all the way through to the finish. And it's like, no, like I'm going to do a draft, and then maybe I'll do another draft, and then I'll be thinking, okay, like what was missing, what was good here, what can I repurpose. It's not like this kind of totally sort of end-to-end completionist thing, is it? But that idea sounds really good. But like, and I think the work thing is definitely, my parents were doctors, and I've kind of come to think that some of these things, they're just sort of, they are quite easy answers to. And I think particularly being a doctor, you are a bit like, I am doing worthy work, and me doing that workloads means that actually, like, great, no one can kind of impugn my choices, because this is a sort of obvious good thing, and like that's kind of that. And I don't know, that's less charitable than I really feel towards them. As like that sounds like I'm being rude,
Obviously.
but I'm not. And I actually love. And I'm sure you'll remember it, but I remember ages ago you did a short story, and it was like a guy in a lawyer's office who like loses his mind and goes to
Yeah,
like murder his boss, and
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
it was great. I remember being like, oh fuck, that's so funny. Um, it just had this like great tone to it where it's like, yeah, what if you did kind of act on these feelings that you get in those like stressful environments where everyone's on you and you're just gonna break. Like
Well,
I thought that
this
was
is
such a great. You should put that on Substack, I think.
yeah. No, I might do. Like, what's funny about so like broadly from recollection, like what ends up happening in that story is that like this sort of associate who's like losing his mind like hides in the ceiling tiles
Yeah,
above
yeah, that was it.
above like a law firm partner, and it's just like observing them and just like considering what they're going to do with these intrusive thoughts. Um, and what I think what is funny about those hothouse environments is that, and this is what I found like the most interesting about working at a law firm, is that it's weirdly you I derived like quite a lot of meaning from just like the drama of the office
Mm.
rather than the work, and the interactions between people and the ego and the ambition and these strange little kingdoms that partners would build using their their business and their money that they were bringing into the firm and the power that they had. They'd be constructing these little like mafioso cliques within the law firm, which is to say that you are actually getting these quite sort of like whipsaws of
Mm.
thoughts and psychology. And people, they get jealous and they hate each other and they suck up to each other. And like all this stuff is happening beneath the surface. But it's just never really spoken about or only ever kind of alluded to uh, the whole time.
And you're right, that is kind of high drama. I mean, like I've never worked in that kind of environment. I was obviously in a rugby environment, and it was always very nice, actually. I think because you had to actually all pull together every week to do well, and actually there was no one. There were people that you were competing with, but it was normally in quite a convivial, help me, I'll help you manner. And then
Yeah,
if you weren't playing, you'd be annoyed, but you wouldn't be like throwing someone under the bus because there was a sort of social contract that just wasn't the done thing. And then there was one guy towards the end of my career, and he was new to our team, and he was a French guy, and he came in and he just had this very odd manner, and he was a sort of real snake, and you're just like, I can't. I've never had to actually deal with this, like someone who's kind of out to get me like every minute of the day at work, and like in a weird underhanded manner, because he was quite like pleasant to your face, and you're just thinking like, this is a really odd. It's a bit like when you watch The Traitors and someone says like, we are here to is this is a game that we're here. It's not personal.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah. How long did
suddenly
it take you?
when someone breaks the little bubble of kind of conviviality that like actually kind of it's nice to have it, but in a weird way it need not exist.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah. How long did it take for you to realise that this guy had your number and he was just trying to?
he I don't know. I just like found him a little irritating, and then I was sort of noticing there are things in training that he would, when it was touch, he'd like leave a shoulder in or something. And so, what are you doing? Things that are sort of they're breaking that like social kind of
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
understanding
yeah.
that everybody has. And then, I mean, the thing, and I didn't, I've never wished this on anybody, but he hurt himself quite badly once the season had started. So then he sort of became like a nothing. You just you're then you can't join in. So while he was still being annoying, he just wasn't actually participating, and you just thought, oh well, like this is annoying because now I have to do like, I don't know, 25% extra work and training because he's not there to sort of fill in for
Yeah.
those reps. But I was like, but at no point was I like, this is a bad thing. I was like, this is Although I did end up injured, so maybe like
yeah. Swings around about. Yeah.
yeah, but that I think people's work, it does become this amazing sort of place for drama. I mean, like I love like Ellis and American Psycho and those kinds of things where you're like, yeah, this is that law firm environment, in a way, and people's little fiefdoms. And I think the thing now as well over the last couple of years where I've been privy to some sort of workplace politics. And I think, like, what do you own at work? And I think with a law firm, it's like, I bring this business, and you'll understand the workings far better than I do. But I think with this big organization I know about, that, you can hear what people are saying. And it's when people kind of gatekeep relationships, it feels like sometimes in a big environment, that's the only thing you actually have. That's the only capital you actually have. Because like in a sports team, once you're gone, there's someone sat in your desk and everyone forgets about you. But actually, if you've got these external relationships you can bring, your little business book, then that's kind of it. That's sort of all you've got
Oh
in a
yeah,
weird way.
totally. And I remember like, I remember like having conversations with partners, i.e. owners of this, law firm pulling in like, millions a year or whatever, and just like the level of cynicism that they have. Like like in a weird, messed up way. Like I kind of loved it. Like there's
Mm.
like the Nietzschean man who just doesn't give a shit about anyone or anything but himself. And I remember one partner just telling me like, he said two things to me. One was just like, everyone goes around pretending like there's some sort of method to law firms and that everyone knows what they're doing. It's like nobody knows what they're doing.
Mm.
Like it's just a blag game, and you're just blagging more and more and more. Like the higher you go, and he just went, "It's chaos all the way down." So
That's very Littlefinger, isn't it? Was he like chaos
yeah,
as a
yeah,
ladder in Game
yeah,
of
exactly.
Thrones? It's
Yeah,
like
exactly.
literally the same thing.
Yeah, but it totally is, and I guess like that's kind of like the appeal of Game of Thrones
Mm.
and Cromwellian Tudor times as well, where actually it's all about game playing and bluffing and like your hand, and especially where the other thing that this partner said to me was that he just became very abstract and just went, yeah, it's very strange, I just sort of like write words on paper and like say these words and like make these sounds, and then that just turns into money. Like it's really weird. And I think he was kind of trying to get out of just like, he's trying to get at like the ephemerality of like the
Mm.
value that you create as a lawyer. Like you're just advising, and you sometimes you're just giving people the confidence to act and stuff rather than hard law in a weird way.
I suppose I've got two things on that, and like one during the pandemic was like working remotely. It was that sort of later point where suddenly all these people are working remotely, and I actually saw like a lawyer work at first hand, like remotely, and I was just like, just out of interest, don't show me anything like you can't show me, sort of thing. But what are you doing?
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and they were just like you say, they were like editing this like really old school looking Word document, and they were just like, yeah. And then I thought, like you say, it's so unofficial that this means anything. Like, that this Word document, everyone's like, this means a lot.
yeah,
And it's like
yeah,
thousands of
yeah,
pounds, like sort of coalesced
yeah,
in
yeah.
like this, like very basic, no frills Word document. You just think, wow, like, yeah, the kind of edges of civilization are sort of lightly policed, aren't they? Really,
Yeah,
in
yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
weird way.
And
But
it's
like,
just,
what
yeah.
makes it from that into your writing? Like, is it like the conversations? Is it like you say the kind of dynamic? Like, are the people there in some form? Are you kind of magpieing those things in your work, or are those, or is it less kind of straight line?
No, no, I am a bit, and I think instead of trying to tell like a workplace drama, I try to just sort of get across a sense of like the temperature and the atmosphere, and in a way, kind of like the futility of trying to derive like your meaning from a workplace environment. And like this is kind of what the older brother essentially is engaged in, a sort of grief displacement, right?
Mm.
They come from, you know, like, their father was a humble shopkeeper. They've decided to embark on this career in an almost kind of self-sacrificial way, um, and making partner is everything, and it almost has a sort of meaning and aim kind of beyond actually what the job is,
Yeah.
and they put so much stock on it, but actually it's all just games and nonsense.
That's such an interesting thing as well. I think, like, and I've talked about this with my parents before, where, you know, when your parents have, like, in a way, what obligation do you have as a child to your parents if they've kind of done what they've done to give you opportunity? Like, do you owe them like anything? Like, what decisions are your a sort of appropriate? I think that kind of obligation is because obviously you hear a lot, parental obligation to a child. You want to do this. There's obviously kind of that seems to have become increasingly insane. Like in very tiger parent that previously tiger
Yeah.
parenting as a thing was regarded as like bizarre, whereas now people sort of seem to sort of unquestioningly people are kind of doing a fair bit of that. It seems like in these maybe more kind of sort of professional environments, but then what obligation does the child have, like, to kind of live up to these
To
things?
those. Yeah.
Is a really interesting question, and I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that's dynamic sounds fascinating. Where obviously, like, in professional terms, if the son sort of surpasses, it's like, is that sort of obligation fulfilled, or is that is that something the son's like decided is a thing, but like you say, it's just based on nothing.
Well, like, so, and I think this is quite an immigrant trope. Actually, is that like, um, children having an obligation to, um, succeed. It's why like sort of immigrant children end up going into professions. I think
Mm.
because they are, um, uh, it's kind of like guaranteed status. Like,
Yeah, like a legitimacy.
yeah, 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 yeah. But then I think what you're grappling with is like once you reach the Everest and you're like, yeah, completed it, did all the things I was meant to do. You end up looking around, being like, right, right. So what was that all in aid of? And um, I think prior generations, like even doctors and surgeons, I'd like, I wonder if, even people who do like very worthy things, there's some sort of like meaning displacement
Mm.
operation that's happening, so that you could fuse the external story of validation that you're getting with like the internal story of like purpose that you have. And I think when you don't align internally, you get this like you get this split, right? Where actually you're just like, oh, I've been doing all of this stuff and I've internalized these external values, but actually these are not my actual
Mm.
values, and it leads to this sort of like psychological split, um, and murdering your
No,
boss.
no, I think that's probably true. I think the more when I thought about sport, and it was very obvious, like you literally play a game every week. You have a game. There's a video game type thing,
Yeah,
and everybody is really it's a sort of pyramid of dissatisfaction where you're like trying to get to the England team, let's say, but once you're there, obviously everyone else is also trying to get there. So you're just like you're having to kind of gird yourself against these challenges, and I think it's sort of some of these professions offer you that same thing. I think even like being a doctor, I remember you can kind of become a consultant, but that doesn't happen until you're kind of like maybe even knocking up to kind of 40, and you're
Yeah,
just thinking you're still you're still apprenticing, you're still doing exams. It's a way of kind of retaining that kind of game playing in terms of like getting to the next level.
yeah,
You
yeah,
almost get to keep, you get to keep doing that in a way that
exactly.
nobody can disagree with, and you don't have to really think about it if you don't want to. I mean, like you say, there are plenty of people who are very well aligned, and they think, that's absolutely fine. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's a great deal for them and like who they are. But obviously, yeah, with other people, if they haven't interrogated it too carefully, like you say, you can kind of go off. And I think the distance between those things comes across really well in
But
some.
I think it goes back to that chaos point again, in a way, in that these environments give the impression of structure, of having
Mm,
tamed uncertainty. So you could live with a career, and it's mapped out for you. And if you just do X, you'll
mm,
get Y. And that's super. That's super attractive, I think, from like an existential perspective,
mm,
because you know I know you must certainly know that when you kind of like step out of that environment, you are then exposed to the sort of the chaos of actual reality. And the chaos of actual reality is sort of it's too big to get your head around. All of these interconnecting technologies, systems, people, networks. Think we're on Substack now. That's a thing that's flared up in the last however many years, and you know reality is just constantly inverting and just teeming and exploding or whatever. But if you're in one of these environments, you can just sort of pickaxe and climb your way up the mountain in a kind
yeah.
of reliable way.
Yeah, you can kind of pretend that the chaos doesn't exist, I suppose. I think with writing as well, like it's very difficult to pick. Sometimes I feel that impulse to find like a lane that I can like stick to,
Yeah,
and like sport was like that, obviously, where you're like, I'm in this sport, and even within that, I'm in a position. So these are the things that I need to be working on, and if I just work on those and try really hard, like then certain things are out of my hands, but I'm kind of doing my bit. But I think with writing, I was even speaking to like this. He's a really talented young novelist, couple of novels under his belt, and I was like,
mm,
"How's your new one coming?" And he's, "Oh, I'm still reading for it." I was like, "Right." And then I was like, "So what are you doing?" He was like, "Oh, I'm writing for TV." And I never quite know what this means. He was like, "I'm writing on spec," and I was like, "What? Like writing what?" And like I think suddenly like even this guy who I thought had his lane and when I spoke to him was very set on what this next novel was.
yeah,
He was like, he's now going, "Oh, I'm actually over here," and then I wonder, like you say, there's so many different avenues for your writing. And like people are monetizing Substacks, doing all sorts of things that you wouldn't think anyone would like care about, let alone pay money for. Um, but then with that, I'm like, oh, even that guy is like sort of casting around for the answers
yeah,
in a way, And I felt that when I spoke to him in the first place, that he was very sort of clear on what he was
yeah,
doing.
yeah. But I think,
Um,
but I think that's the thing I love about writing, and I can't wait with this novel. Like, I really want to go down the traditional publishing route, just to
mm,
have done it, I guess, straight off the bat. But and fingers crossed it goes all right. If it doesn't, whatever. But like, I do think just creating something and putting it out there, like you don't realize that you know it just increases your surface area of serendipity. Like you don't
mm,
realize, like, when you put your original book out,
mm.
you know, did you sort of did you know kind of what weird and wacky tangents it was going to throw towards your way, or
Not at all. And I think the sort of reasons I did it were, I had a multitude of reasons, but one of them, I'd almost I did quite a good job of sort of divorcing myself of any expectations of success from it. So it was almost like at that point I was trying to figure out what to do for work, and I was like, if nothing else, this is a kind of proof that I could do a project like this. And I was already doing some kind of ghostwriting for businesses and business sort of founders and that kind of thing. So I was like, oh, this could get me more of that kind of thing. It will kind of maybe raise my sort of perceived value. Maybe I could follow the sports angle. And like you say, it was almost like a big part of the thinking was like, this will just open up my suite of possibilities. And fortunately, like the book did some of its own kind of, I mean, it had some success in itself. So that was like another benefit that I was not expecting at all. But even, and it's actually quite fast in a way. Like, so it took sort of 3 months maybe of kind of just doing some respectable amounts of sales, me kind of hassling people to look at it. Probably sold about 1,000 copies over the first 3 months. And then I think I just got kind of lucky as well, the timing of the first lockdown where suddenly, people had more time to read and things. And my reviews on Amazon hit a certain point where it's like,
because there was
it's not
some
like,
category. It was like, was there a particular? Was it like sports memoir or something that you
yeah,
ended
it got in one of the more niche ones, and then and then you sort of start seeing that how these things can turn in your favor, and they happen quite fast, and suddenly you're going like, small category, bigger category, and in the end it ended up at the top of the whole sport book thing, for, I don't know, a couple of days or something. But it was very exciting. You just can't quite believe that anyone cares, and then it sat there and you're like, oh wow. Yeah, and I don't know. I've not done anything. I've tried to kind of move from rugby. I think I would do another rugby book, but it wouldn't be about me. I don't think. I think the only thing that I do like the idea of as well is doing a kind of Bret Easton Ellis style, like taking it and then just turning it into some sort of sordid novel. which, but I
demented
mean,
characters?
yeah, invented like all the stories that you couldn't sort of put in it in the first place. But I think the other thing, my brother was a rugby player as well, and he played a sort of a tier above me, I suppose. But I did say to him, like, let's do like fringes too, because he has the same feelings as me, even though the sort of trappings of his athletic existence were sort of better and nicer.
Mm-hmm.
But it's almost the same, where it's like, oh, I'm not doing as well as I thought I might, or like, I want more. It's kind of everyone's the same, I think, is the thing. And you don't, it's easy to look at these people who you think, like this novelist guy, like, oh, he's got it right. He knows what he's doing. And then you're like, no, he doesn't, because otherwise he'd be like, totally convinced by whatever his other project is. I think it's a really fascinating space.
I think that dissatisfaction is literally everywhere. Like, because like fundamentally, whenever you start on some endeavor, like the thing that's driving you in that endeavor is just this idealized image of what you're going to do. And then as soon as you come into contact with reality, you're just like, oh my God, like this is so much harder than I thought.
I do think that's a writing thing, is like, you need a bloody mindedness, and as well, it's going to be a bit shit, like your draft. Like, that's just a fact. And so you've got to get over that and finish it. And there's this huge power in finishing, even if it's like, how much work it needs. But I think a lot of people talk themselves out of that. And I've done it with these fiction drafts, maybe, where it's like, you should actually just finish it as practice. And, this novelist, I remember he said that he did a creative writing course or whatever, and the teacher was like, read this Cormac McCarthy book, it's amazing. He read it and he was like, I thought it was dead and that I could write a better book. So he went off, wrote a book, he wrote a draft, and then was like, this is way worse than that. But it was amazing, kind of, the ambition and the bloody mindedness to kind of see it through, and then to be like, oh no, actually, like, this is quite hard. But
you say bloody mindedness, but it's also like whenever you do anything, you almost need like a lack of self-awareness in order to get through. Like, you just need
But do you like doing it? Do you like doing it? Because I found with the book projects in particular, I do quite like the middle of them where you're like, you know, because if you know that it's probably like not that great, I do think there's so much possibility and freedom in that. And I actually, some of my most fun writing memories are being up at night, like late at night, writing and like in my little sort of solo bubble where everyone thinks you've sort of gone insane. And I actually really relished it, and I really like that kind of puzzle of the writing at that point. I think, yeah, once it gets closer to the end, you're a bit up for me. I'm like, ooh, thinking, I don't know, and then you kind of start. But I think that bit
Yeah,
earlier, I actually really
yeah,
like. I think a lot of people say, "Oh, writing's like super hard and it's painful and stuff." I'm like, not in my experience. When you know you're working on like the right thing, even if you're not like
yeah.
super about the quality of it, I've been like, no, this is like a good idea for me to do this, and I am enjoying it. I don't ever think like, you know.
Yeah, totally. Like for me, the art just comes more from like um, just all of the other things I want to do, and how this is a thing that's still ongoing, if you know what I mean.
Mm,
I think the bits I love about it are when I think it's it is those sort of like breakthrough moments that you have, and you kind of been like, I don't know, like psychologically kind of like circling away forwards for a while, and then all of a sudden you're like, yeah, I just need these component parts, and then you're able to just sort of like almost quite painlessly just like
mm,
get going. Um, and I think I think that in a way that's kind of what like novel writing is that you start off in a place of like unknowing. You know, you're writing these words on the page, and bit by bit, you're it's almost like a pre problem formulation space, and you don't have enough words written down yet in order for you to actually define what the problems you're trying to solve are.
yeah.
So it's about, I think you basically you need to keep on going and persevering so that the problems that you're trying to solve in your writing actually become legible. And by legible I mean the the themes and the preoccupations that you're concerned with kind of crystallize around like these specific things.
Mm,
And I think it's going from that unknowing to then like the known unknowns, and then you kind of like filling it in. And I think as you each time you kind of happen upon like the next stage, I think that's quite exciting because you're like, oh, I have in this like weird soup of words, like I'm definitely progressing, even if other people could see like gibberish
yeah,
or
it's
whatever.
like other people would see that meme where the guy's like drawing lines between all the like
Yeah.
no, I think that's really fascinating, and it reminds me a little bit of the anecdote about them writing Breaking Bad, and they would almost deliberately write him into a corner at the end of an episode. So then, because I think they were writing like week to week, so it was almost like, right, we're giving ourselves what feels like a kind of intractable problem in order to kind of stimulate our own
Yeah.
creativity to write him out. But yeah, obviously, when you're doing a novel, you're not in a writer's room and you've got nothing to kind of respond against until you've put it there. So it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, you need to kind of threat, like you're the one who's like cutting out the jigsaw pieces and throwing them on the floor for yourself. Is sort of
Yeah.
what
Exactly.
I can't
Exactly.
believe we've come up with like a legible metaphor for that, which is yeah,
Legendary.
that's quite good. should, should we talk about like what we've been reading?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's do
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. What I mean, we just did Fathers and Sons, Ivan Turgenev, for this boys' book club we're in, and like that is funny because everyone did kind of agree, didn't they? They were like, "Oh, this is good."
It was quite curious, and I think it was the first book club of the year. So we thought that, and we thought, oh, Russian,
Mm,
you know, maybe people will be sort of put off by that, and the numbers were a bit lower than usual. But then
mm,
everyone who came ended up being kind of surprised at how I remember someone saying that just like how modern a novel it is. Like it does not feel like you're reading this kind of like, maybe the world is like antiquated and a bit weird, but like the the writing style is like, it's super dialogue heavy. It's lots of cool little psychological um, cul-de-sacs and avenues that you go down, like with the different characters. Yeah, like a bit of surprise, and also like I've got it here. Look how slim that volume is. Look how slim. I couldn't find it on my shelf earlier. Do you know what I mean? I was just like, where is it?
And I do think that was definitely a thing that everyone was surprised by, wasn't it? It's like when you think Russian, you think War and Peace and whatever else, and you're like, ooh. And I definitely had that a couple of years ago. Where I'm not ready to kind of start reading like the Russians, and this is a kind of proto-Russian, isn't it? Where it's like it's a very early. We're saying it's almost like they're not quite sure what a novel is yet, and it's yet to have those kind of big heavy hitters come in. It's like it predates them by a couple of years, but there's also the sort of bizarrely modern things, like someone said it was like the credits of like a teen drama at the end. It's like a where are they now in the epilogue, and it's like, oh yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
was it Peter Petrovich, whatever, is in
yeah.
Frankfurt, where he's the toast of the town, or like he's big in Dresden, and then it's like
Bloody legend.
and that is so peculiarly modern, to be like,
Yeah.
oh, right, what's happening? So, and obviously now, when you read like a literary novel, that just never happens. It's like,
Like I've had this in a reading experience a few times when I read like I read like a classic, and I just think, oh my god, like this is so cliched, and it takes a bit for your brain to figure out, like, this is not cliched, like this is actually at that time, this is like the wellspring of this particular, like this was the invention of
yeah,
like
this was
that
the
tool.
first version, and now I'm
Yeah,
like annoyed that it exists. Like,
exactly. Like when I read Dune, I was just like, ugh, like this is just like Star Wars, like so dumb. Like, no, bro, wrong way around.
it's like, and we said as well is because it's literally called Fathers and Sons, but it's also it's weird because like in a way, it's not necessarily even much about the father and son pairings as well. And there's a lot of uncles.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
and one of the mentor relationships is with his mate, who's like a bit older and not related to him. So you're just like, this is a funny, it's almost not about what it says in some respects. But I think the thing was we were saying was it felt like very sympathetic, and that it would like meet you where you were. So if you were the kind of aging, if you were a parent and you were kind of, oh, my ideas are old and I don't understand these young people, you could easily find that. And if you were like the young guy full of like vim and vigor and inspired by your sort of
yeah,
university studies, there's that guy. And it did feel, broadly sympathetic to kind of everybody, really. I don't know if there were too many people that it was kind of condemnatory of, like, it was sort of, this is this, and you can kind of take it as it is.
yeah, yeah. No, it does feel like that. I think the writing style sort of lingers over each character, and it kind of lingers over them in a sort of good faith manner, and you see, and I guess in a way, in the way South Park kind of like lambasts all groups of people equally. You see um, you see as well as sympathy, you see all the shortcomings of these different positions, right? Like Arcadi's father, he is a bit, he is a bit of a sort of, I don't know, a bit of a fool. He can't really run his farm. He's
Yeah.
getting he's getting rings run round him when it comes to the serfs. And you've got like Berezov, who's just a bit of a dick, to be honest.
Yeah.
And although all of his scientific theories, in a rational sense, improving the world, and throwing off like the shackles of authority, um, and in a weird way, like unites the peasantry, because everyone seems to engage with him and find him engaging. Like, he's also highly arrogant, and he's so arrogant that, spoiler alert, he ends up fucking giving himself flipping tetanus or whatever. You've got like Arkady, who, like, I guess his weakness is that he's just soft.
He's
and
a
he
bit
just
too, he's
yeah
a bit too malleable. Like,
yeah
he
yeah
hasn't really got the courage of his. I think as well, like, interesting listening to you talking. So a lot of these classics, they are kind of timeless because these, and I think I was just thinking you could easily transpose it to sort of now and
oh
have
yeah
Bazarov be the tech bro who's like, you're all wrong, and
oh
like, nothing means anything, and all this old stuff is bullshit.
yeah
And then have the young guy from uni, and then you can have the old guys who are like, maybe running some sort of legacy business, or like running a law firm that's being undercut by like
oh,
like just refusing to move with the times or whatever it is. You could
yeah.
easily map it to now, and I
Well,
think
I think right now it's I was thinking that the exact thought this morning, where it's like Twitter X is like the news square versus aging newspapers and like legacy media. Like, that's where my head went, and I was like, oh yeah, that is this moment, and in a weird way, X is kind of like so untethered and teeming and despises authority, and authority figures, and you have these authority figures in legacy media being like, no, we need to fact check you and verify you or whatever. Like, that dynamic feels like it maps really well onto the dynamics in this novel.
who knew Turgenev
But
writing sort
do
of
you know what?
like anti-tech bro scream?
But do you know what? Like, I think I think the generational divide just happens every generation,
Of
right?
course.
So it's, and I guess that's the appeal of it. Like,
And I think the sympathy for that was kind of nice and I think there's something about the nuance because, like, he is a bit of a dick and he is proven wrong, but I don't think like Bazarov. I think there is still some sympathy for him, and it's like he misses the wood for the trees, and that's where the sympathy is. Like,
yeah,
and,
yeah,
he sort of denies his own happiness in sort of pursuit of these inflexible ideas, and you're just like, okay, well, there's sympathy in that, like, because it's sort of like, oh, you had a chance at like probably quite a nice life, and
yeah.
yeah, I don't know, and I think,
Were you
but
saying like his sort of heroic aspect is that he genuinely has principles that he kind of like lives and dies by?
largely, like, yeah,
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 um, yeah, and like that is that inflexibility, and that is admirable. That it's obviously lacking in an idea of like a soul.
yeah. Well, that was it, and I
Yeah,
think that was I think they talk about like love, don't they? But that was a kind of, I think for him even, he was sort of reducing even nature to its constituent parts. There's
yeah,
that famous Richard Feynman quote where it's like someone asks him, like, I'm going to butcher the quote, but someone asks him about like, oh, as a scientist, I bet this is all very like nuts and bolts to you, very boring. He's like, no, like I see the kind of wonder. I understand quite how weird and difficult and impossible this is, like from a kind of cellular level
yeah,
upward. He's like, so I see a beauty like from here to here, and and maybe not the evidence of God necessarily, but an evidence of like divinity in how unlikely this is, and you're just like, oh, okay, that's a kind of
yeah,
he
yeah,
would the scientism begot some spirituality for him, but obviously Bazarov doesn't have that. He's like
yeah.
he's everything is like system and science, and you're just like, yeah, not sure it is, mate. And
Yeah,
um,
totally, totally.
yeah, what else are you reading? Anything else?
So, like I said, I'm reading.
You got Churchill on your pods?
Yeah, Church on the pod, although that's kind of taken a bit of a back seat more recently. I've got to the good bit where we know we're going to win the war. The Americans have joined in, and they've come to save us all. So
Just
there's less, there's less hanging by a thread. But I'm reading, this David Deutsch Beginnings of Infinity, which is a bit of a tech bro book actually. Like,
I've heard that cited. It's a very Naval rabbit. Yeah, that's so good.
Exactly. And I won't profess to be kind of like I'm probably understanding about 40% of it, to be honest.
I felt like that with Finite and Infinite Games, James
Right.
Cass. It's like an amazing book, and I think to what we were talking about earlier, the kind of career, the games you're playing, like what you're actually doing. It's an amazing book for that kind of level of understanding, but it is pretty dense, even though it's short. So you are constantly like, I'm not smart.
Yeah. You find yourself just being like, have I just understood? Like, I've read a page, but like, what have I actually done in terms of like, I've just repeated these words in my brain, and no meaning has been derived from them. But like that, like, what is this is another guy like Claudio Ravelli, who's an Italian scientist who's written a bunch
Those
of
are so good, those books.
yeah, and I think I kind of get the same thing where like I almost read them in the same way that I would read fiction sometimes, and I just let stuff go if I don't kind of get it, and I just think that allows me to, when I do get to the kind of the sort of like conclusive points that are being made, you do get some marrow from them, and you do get a sense of infinity, shall we say, or like there's some things that Deutsch says about just like the reach of scientific truth, and every now and again you'll just get like a shiver down your spine at like the extent of what he means, because he's telling you like some of these rules that we happen upon are true for like eternity, like and how he talks a lot about like possibility within anything that does not break the rules of physics essentially is on the table, and he really like fleshes that out, and he talks about like you could go to another planet and you could transmute elements on that planet into elements that you need in order to sort of run a civilization, and it does sort of like melt your brain a bit when he starts like filling in these gaps, and he makes sci-fi a reality, so that's really cool. And what's also quite good is that it's a great pre-bed book because it's so dense.
Yeah, you're like
Yeah, exactly. And the other book I'm reading is The Second Act by, I hope I get this right, Henry Oliver, who
he does a Substack. That guy.
he's on Twitter a lot, and he is an absolute dude. Like,
The
absolute
Second Act. I think I've heard of
yeah.
that. And it's like people that did something else.
Yeah.
Right.
And that again. So this is, I was talking earlier about, this Churchill biography has given me lots of ideas about like the nature of like faith and like having faith in the future, and kind of like this having an inherent optimism when your path seems quite scattergun and it doesn't entirely make sense as you go through it. I.e., so Churchill, for example, had some absolute fails.
Yeah, some epic fails.
Some epic fails, but actually those fails were this bizarre kind of preparation for the precise skills that he would need to succeed in the Second World War as Prime Minister. And the second act is quite like that. So they talk about, this heiress of some American newspaper that her father owned, and the father passes it to not her, but her husband, who's like a newspaperman. and the guy basically she ends up just sort of like learning all the like the lessons of the trade by accident, and by all accounts she's like this oddly meek woman.
Mhm.
And then her husband dies, and she's like, fuck it, I'm going to keep this newspaper business like in the family. And by some bizarre manner, she's just learned all the lessons that she will need to turn this newspaper into like a thriving business. And there are loads of different examples like that where
Mm.
like people's lives like don't really make sense as they're sort of living them, and then all of a sudden an opportunity will arise, and it turns out that actually all along, and it's almost something like mystical and woo woo about it,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
um, that yeah, the opportunity arrives, and they're just like they have all of the attributes to just exploit it to the max.
I think that is the kind of great man of history type thing. It definitely feels like, I know every era has those people, but there is a sort of mysticalness and inevitability about them. Like at the
Yeah,
time, like you said,
yeah,
you kind
yeah.
of go back and there was nothing inevitable about this at all.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
like,
it becomes like it's how society throws up these people who just end up weirdly becoming like almost archetypal, and
mm,
it's probably like there was something in the air during like a generation or something that meant actually maybe it was kind of inevitable that someone like this would get thrown up, but
yeah,
they then become like so archetypal. I'm kind of thinking of Donald Trump in my mind actually, like
mm,
only Donald Trump would be able to like hack the new media world scape as we kind of know it in this kind of like quasi post literate world. We had this discussion the other day, um, where we're moving to like maybe more of an oral tradition or like a
mm.
short form video. And it's like, here is this guy who's like half man, half pro wrestler. Uh,
But I mean, like, yeah, he's very funny, and there's certain things I find very interesting. The things that he said that have become parlance. What is it? Many such cases. Those kinds of things where you're like, yeah, he's kind of brute forced something into like the collective lexicon.
yeah,
And it's the me. I suppose it's the meme culture, but also I think it's just an age thing as well. That guy could not be 35. No
no,
one. It's like he could be exactly the same and be 35, and it's like no. So there is a kind of random timing aspect to it as well, that I find very interesting. Let's de-Trump. I think we're
good idea.
let's
Good
let's
idea.
go. Like, funnily enough, and I know we normally bring every conversation around to Arsenal FC, but I think
Yes.
there's something about, there are certain people. So Arsenal have Bukayo Saka, he's the best player, but it's like he's not inevitable. And they even say in his academy group he was kind of the fifth best in some respect. There was like other people that you'd look at beyond him. I think athletes, they are latterly seen as inevitable when in fact their kind of emergence is very precarious. I mean, Marcus Rashford is another one where he's on this huge contract, but he only got a game as an 18-year-old because there's about 6 injuries ahead of him, and they played him against some sort of terrible Norwegian team on a Thursday night, and you're just like, that is so random. And
Yeah.
so I think it's the ultimate of kind of randomness, and is kind of age dependent. You could be, if you're just the same age as someone who's kind of regarded as better than you at 18, then you're out, and then maybe your life will take a totally
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
turn.
Yeah.
If you were 2 years younger, maybe your pathway is kind of unimpeded. It's very yeah, it does kind of narrow those same concerns down to a very, obvious, legible path.
Path. Yeah. For sure. For sure. I mean, I think what's interesting as well is like when the opposite happens. So like, well, not the opposite, but the legible path is actually more illegible than you realize. So I'm thinking about like young Martin Odegaard,
Mm,
the next big thing. And actually, he is a kid and he's been thrown into like Real Madrid, which is like that is a dressing room of just not just men, but like men who have seen it and done it at like the highest level. And you
I
know,
suppose they have the certainty, don't they? Like
exactly.
you're in a place where it's like, not only am I personally certain of myself and like what I can do and what I have done and who I am and what I should be doing, but like this entire team has this bizarre inevitability about it, and
Yeah.
you're 15 and have done nothing.
Yeah. And it's like, are you one of us aliens who have genuinely been there and done that? And you know, he was found wanting and was sort of cast out into the wilderness. And you know, we snaffled him up, or Mikel Arteta snaffled him up, and he's got this. You know, he's had this habit of um, finding value. It's a bit Moneyball in a way, but like these players who, for one reason or another, have like all the potential, but are damaged in some degree, and he kind of like rehabilitates them.
Yeah, they've kind of stumbled but not fallen at the first hurdle, and he's
Yeah,
and I think there is a kind of hunger about those guys where they're like, they've had a taste, they've been cast out. And one of the things in the boys literacy project, when I work on it, we fall back on sport a lot, and part of the reason is because these guys' lives do map to the hero's journey so very easily, you know, where it's like
yeah.
the mentor, you know, call to adventure, the teacher appears, you know, their first test, then they fail, you know, it's like it happens so very regularly that, and it's because of the genius of that archetype that it maps to life, I suppose. But yeah, I find that the boys are super into it because they can then really clearly draw the line. Like most of what they do revolves around football. I think actually, like they're all fans. They're all playing like FIFA, whatever it's called now. They're all actually playing football. Um, they're all following a team, and football is the kind of cultural like lingua franca of the world,
Yeah,
isn't it? Where it's like you can go anywhere in the world and go like Manchester United. Well, I obviously wouldn't, but you know,
absolutely not.
you just
Maybe to
go,
pour scorn.
yeah, disgusting. But you can go anywhere in the world and use that as a kind of conversational elbow, you know, to kind of
Yeah,
like find some
yeah,
common ground, even if you disagree. And I think with the boys, like they can draw the line, I've realized, between, you know, sport, hero's journey, then into these other stories that they know more about than they realize. They
yeah,
know more about mythology. You know, there's things like Percy Jackson, but then there's mythology sprinkled throughout, you know, Fortnite, comic books,
yeah, yeah.
you know, whatever. And they know more than they think. And then that gives them the confidence to then look at something else and be like, oh, and you can just see them do it. It's really satisfying.
Well, I think on that point, I do think again, like not to hark on it over and over and over again, but like it's I guess for boy or just children growing up in particular, like it's super important to realize that like any suffering that you might be going through at the moment, like it's much easier to be like, this is my test and I just need to come through it. And if I persevere, I will get like the fruits of that perseverance. You know, football players have to do it all the time.
Mm,
Like it's the exception that they're not suffering.
mm,
Um, you know, in some way, or if you get let go at academy level and you kind of like, you know, you end up going to like a lesser good club. You know, often I think what people find themselves doing is like looking to other paths, other stories for inspiration to be like, oh no, actually, like this doesn't mean it's the end. This is just like another hurdle in my way that I kind of need to go through. Because otherwise, like the opposite of that is, um, you know, the capriciousness of reality, and
mm.
um,
Well, it's
there's no
Basil's nihilism in a way, isn't it?
exactly there's no meaning to this. There's no meaning to this suffering that I'm going through, and therefore I must give up.
That's actually pretty interesting, isn't it? Where it's like, yeah, it it's sort of irrational optimism is the rational choice, because you're like, because the opposite is sort of a sort of resigned fatalism. And yeah, I in a weird way, like with anything, like we're saying about writing a book, it's like, yeah, this
Yeah,
bizarre
yeah.
optimism is actually the logical decision to make. And
Well, I guess that's the magic of it, right? Because it's like if you if you persist in creation and the thing that you create, like madly, it will beget goodness, and you'll create these
mm,
like virtuous circles, and that's what's
yeah,
so cool about creativity, right?
even if what you're doing is bad, like
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
which
yeah.
is like hilarious. I think in like I wound up someone the other day by saying, because we're talking about Arsenal's season, and I said, God reserves his toughest tests for his strongest soldiers, and like they were like, that's not, no, that's not what this is. But I enjoyed it nonetheless, and it was like, yeah, I didn't see the game yesterday. You did. I've seen the highlights, and I was just like, oh, like it's tough. This, like, following along with these guys, they're like
Right.
dog tired. There's no
Yeah.
one on the bench. They're all injured. You're just watching it like, oh my god, I can't like put myself through the ringer here.
Like I'm feeling for these players, like the sort of defensive lapses in concentration. Like, look, Foggin standards and like all that stuff, and like do better Partey, like do better Marino, and like I agree. I agree with that at sort of like micro level, but at the same time, like these a lot of this stuff is like fatigue based. There's so much load on like a smaller squad. Though Villa were able to bring on Duran, I think they brought on like Luka Watsits.
They had quite a stacked bench, didn't they? I remember someone seeing a picture of it and going like, and then you look at Arsenal, there's a load of like academy lads, and then sometimes I'm like, and obviously they know more about it, but sometimes you're like, is it worth throwing one of them on and just like
Yeah,
hoping for the
same.
best?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
it feels like we never do that. But then, obviously they'll know if the sort of 17-year-old
Is able
is,
to like, yeah,
yeah,
but like it must be like the worst thing ever. Like concede you're 2-0 up, you concede a goal, and you're like, I'm gassed, like I'm so gassed, and we're gonna have to try and hang on, and if Saliba's playing, he's got a hamstring injury. Like, do we concede those 2 goals? Like, you've got that defensive solidity, and then you've got Timber playing at right back instead of Partey, and there are all these like knock-on effects that happen. So, like, I kind of like, I don't want to really like have at it with this team, because I think like they're a really good team. A lot of it is about like being unlucky this season, and I think they just need to like. I don't know if I want to give up on the season from the perspective of like, if we don't finish top, which I think is unlikely. I'm not going to like throw my toys out of the pram and be like absolutely furious about it, because I've seen that there've been so many like external derailing actions that I think it is unfair to like go in on those players.
I agree with you. I think it's been like, we talked about it before, but everything's kind of come home to roost in a sort
Yeah,
of most unfortunate manner. But they're still kind of plugging away and actually doing all right. Like it's
well,
not
back into the
the
league,
worst.
into the
But I
Champions
think
League.
the kind of the constant narrativizing that we do around it is so funny, because yeah, they now play so often, and there's so much information and discourse that you're constantly like, whoa, and then you're kind of creating these quite abstract narratives around something that's like not yet finished at all. And
Yeah,
yeah, it's really interesting as a sort of thing. um
yeah,
it's just the easiest, it's probably the easiest thing for us to seize on, if it's not like the news cycle, that we're just like, this is where we're finding our kind of like stresses that we're opting in.
I think as a fact, like I think the best thing about sports fandom is the constant hypothesizing and wanting to be proved right the whole time. Like everyone is at it, and like my favorite moment of fandom was like a few seasons ago when you had like Gary Neville, boo evil, basically saying, I don't understand this Arsenal team. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know why they brought Ben White. They're in trouble, etc., etc., etc. And then Arsenal fans were just so hot on the team because we were like, no, I think we've been watching us very closely and we think we see something. And then you get vindicated as the season sort of unfurls. Just like, fucking yes, you know?
I want, because I mean, I'm not in the business of making like predictions in public, so I wonder what it's like. I wonder what it's like, you know, to be that person, be the soothsayer, and be like,
Yeah.
this is what's going to happen, and then have, you know, the Twitter hose turn on you and be like, you're so wrong, and like, you know, you're wrong, and for all these reasons, and you said this like 3.5 years ago, and these are all the, look at all these clips, you're such an idiot, like, you know, there is something kind of terrifying about that, like as a
Yeah.
business. But at least it's about football. At least it's like, you know, people care a lot, but at least it's not like kind of super serious, and you could maybe kind of externalize it like that. But there is something about that where, yeah, you're right. You're like, there's this. Not only do you get like you can pick and choose when you're right, and then you can weaponize it. Whereas obviously somebody else is like constantly at the mercy of like everybody's rage.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's utterly silly and tribal and like self-justifying, and it properly taps into lizard brain. Like it taps into like substrata brain that it's like, you know, the like guerrilla troops like beating each other around the head with clubs kind of brain level.
and even with people who you like ostensibly agree with, I remember years ago getting a taxi somewhere, and the guy was an Arsenal fan. And we ended up talking, and then we had like wildly divergent opinions on Robin van Persie, and I remember being like, "You're so wrong! Like, you know, how can you be a fan and think this?" And then it's like, even within, you're just like, "You're right." You know, it's insane behavior.
It's utterly insane. But yeah, like, yeah, I suppose on to last night again. Or maybe just like Arsenal and narrative and social media. Like, I do wonder if, and this is being me being a bit out there and man of the people, but like, you know, there's a lot of hatred gets poured out towards these fan channels because, you know, a lot of fans, they come out of the match, they're proper geezers. They're like, yeah, if I had a gun, I would have shot Martin Odegaard. And they say obviously like heinous, ridiculous stuff. And people are like, well, it's rage bait. It's all about driving clicks. They don't really care about like the team because they're creating such a negative kind of online environment around these players. And I'm often in like two minds about it. Sometimes I'm thinking like, bloody hell, like you are going so far. Like, what is wrong with you? Like, you absolute maniac. But then there's like another part of me that's like, you know, am I just bringing this sort of like snobbishness to football fandom? Like, obviously, these people do not mean what they're saying. Like, they're just, it's almost like metaphorical, just guff.
Is the reality construction as well. I think it's valid because you're right. There's like, and each team has this little ecosystem. Obviously, the Arsenal one is the best and best,
Of course.
and you know the aesthetes football fandom. But like, I was really amused a while ago when if you find that list of sort of Nabokov's opinions on different writers, and it's like most of them he's like Guff Merchant. Like, you know, it's
Savage.
and they're all it's absolutely brutal, and they're all like, you know, all-time authors. They're all, you know,
He's like,
canonical writers, and he's like,
good to read when you're 13 years old kind of thing. It's like
yeah,
Tolstoy.
like good game, like gateway to serious stuff, or like what it's like. Even there's everything. There's like absolute like disdain. There's damning with faint praise. There's like, and then there's sort of a grudging respect in a couple, and then there's one or two where he's like, they're probably his mate or something, and he's like, yeah, genius. And there's like there's one or two, but they're probably like Shakespeare and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
there's no, and football fandom has a sort of Nabokov level of
Oh, big time. And it's so funny, like all the different facets of fandom that there are. Like, there's like the proper gutter. I describe it as like the daytime TV kind of fandom where it's like 0 calories. Like I'm watching it because it is 0 calories, and obviously like utterly inane, but I don't have to really do anything about it. And at the other end, you've got like Billy Carpenter writing these like 7,000 word like marathon essays that go into like the minutiae of transfer marks and statistical analysis of like
I
what
don't
we
understand where
need.
people, I don't understand where people get these statistics, but like as
Yeah,
well, there's like the Swiss Ramble guy who goes through the kind
yeah,
of
yeah,
accounting, the like teams' accounts, and it's like this is their actual financial situation, and you're just like,
yeah,
what? I'm like, how have you
yeah,
done this?
yeah. But it reminds me of like the whole. What's quite cool about like the online world thing is that like some people do just like go off and do the thing, like just do the thing, just go off and do the thing, and then one way or another, like end up getting involved in football or whatever. Like I think I have seen that like a few
Mm,
times where people end up writing. They've been writing for yeah, like I think there's like some publication that does scouting on players,
mm.
um, and yeah, like they've ended up being picked up by clubs as well. So like
Yeah, that's the working public
yeah,
ethos, isn't it?
yeah,
And that
yeah,
is, I
yeah,
think that's so true. I mean, like everything you have publicly is a little mini advert for what you can do, and it's wild that that can kind of bleed into these domains you think are kind of totally remote from you. I think
yeah,
it's sort of wild aspect of it. But yeah, I mean, I wonder, yeah, with the TikTok US thing, whether there will be this kind of influx of people to Substack. I don't know, and maybe the TikTok thing will kind of reverse. But there's a suggestion that maybe it will be delayed or deferred or whatever. But yeah, I think it's kind of it's constantly changing and it's all up for grabs, isn't it? Which is the kind
yeah.
of crazy bit.
It's quite mad that it's like actually full on happened. Like it does. I guess it
Yeah,
does set a precedent for governments and social media platforms. That's quite
yeah.
savage.
I think the other thing is, and I never really think about these sorts of numbers, but like TikTok has 170 million US users, so it's like it is a kind of enormous part of people's lives and part of the kind of cultural landscape. And I think people think what they think about TikTok, but it's such a broad place with like a bit like we just said about fandom. It's got
Yeah,
real kind of basement stuff all the way up to someone explaining something extraordinarily complex and interesting. And yeah, and to have it just turned off is sort of unprecedented, isn't it? It's like I was saying to someone yesterday, it's like turning off TV.
yeah,
In
yeah,
like the 70s, or
yeah.
when like half the population would reliably be looking at the same thing at the same time. I mean, obviously they're not looking at the same thing on TikTok at the same time, but to have that many people just have one of their things is nuts.
It's quite jarring. Yeah, it
Yeah.
must be quite jarring. And also, there's the other like the livelihood aspect. Like there must be, you've got a lot of creators who've been
Mm. And businesses. I mean, other people.
yeah,
That's like how some businesses find their customers. I suppose. I think it's another kind of feather in the cap for things like Substack because yeah, you're not like locked into their thing. So it's like
yeah.
you've the email addresses and you can take them
Well,
wherever. But that's
in like on the like kind of on that point, well, ish. like a lot of like the tech people that I follow on Twitter, a lot of them are kind of like solopreneurs, and like their whole model is like go viral on TikTok and sell your software as a service solution or whatever. And I is there something like mad about like the TikTok algo or something that just surfaces insanely like relevant content for whatever you happen to be watching or something.
You have to take these things with a pinch of salt, but there was a good Twitter thread I saw yesterday where it was a software engineer who was like, I left TikTok 6 months ago, ask me anything. And it was really interesting. And one of the things he was saying was that he was like, the algorithm is ridiculously good and
Yeah.
is so far ahead of Reels or, other stuff. And I think that will be an interesting thing for Substack with their notes feed, like it does feel a bit basic in terms of what you see, but there is an element of once you engage with something, you do get it back. So there is an element where it obviously seems to be learning from what you're doing. But I think with TikTok, there is something about it, clearly, that it has this incredible kind of understanding of what will appeal to you. And I suppose it's probably a bit of both as well, in that it's so easy to just like flick on something else that you will quickly self filter as well. Like
Right.
you obviously forget what you flicked away from immediately, but so there's the algorithm doing its work. There's also you like training,
Right. Got you.
kind of
Yeah.
forget like that kind of
Yeah.
almost bias of forgetting what you've ignored, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And you're or also you're like, oh, I could click that, but I'm not going to click that because then the algo is going to start serving me up like this random stuff and kind of that weird symbiotic relationship between you and algo.
Yeah, I have found it quite difficult to like share writing on there. I think like it doesn't seem very easy to kind of share your own writing. I know there's authors, Colleen Hoover is the one that's kind of blown up on there, partly like her. I've not watched much of her stuff or anything, but she had her own account. But I think quite a lot of the time you're not even sharing the writing; you're kind of sharing like the journey of you doing it, and then it seems very difficult to, I think, and Substack has that over everywhere else, where it's like, people in the first place, they were there for the writing and the writing sits there and is there to be looked at. Whereas I think these other places, you're still like, oh, it's not a good reading experience. Like, how do I get people like from there to here? There's still this like leap, and it's obviously in TikTok's interest to not facilitate that.
Yeah. Totally.
Well, that's about an hour and a half. Should we call it?
I think we should call it. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was good fun.
That was fun, wasn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah. Well, we can do it again, but
Yeah, why not?
yeah. We talk about this on bollocks anyway, so we might
Yeah,
as well, codify it. Yeah. So what's like next? I suppose you're just going to press on with the novel.
Yeah, I think so. I've got a pretty hard deadline to get this thing done by. So I think, yeah, before work, after work, weekends, I think I just need to sort of lay into it and get it done. And then, I think it's quite funny. I've already been kind of thinking about like the next phase, if it goes well, and talking myself out of it. So like, oh God, what if an agent actually does take a bite of this thing, and then I have to balance work whilst working on my edits, and it's quite funny how your mind just starts, not focusing on the thing.
Or like catastrophizing the like best result. You're like, oh, if I did get what I needed or wanted, like how would that be bad?
Yeah, exactly. As it becomes like actual reality, you're like, oh, weird. This is actual reality. Yeah, but what about you, mate? What about what's on?
This is the first time in a while I've not had like a book that I'm definitely doing, I suppose, or that I should finish. I think I suppose the little novel draft I've got going, I should probably like press on and finish. But I think it's been good to park it for a bit, and it's one of those where I wonder if it's like I feel like the themes are quite timely. It's like a YA thing. It's almost like if Britain was sort of locked down and someone politically almost enforced a sort of new set of rules on everybody, like what would that look like? And then kind of leaving, yeah, hopefully leaving the kind of judgment up to the reader in a way. But yeah, I wouldn't say I've made loads of progress on it. I think there's a lot of stuff where I'm like, oh, this is pretty good, and there's some kinks to iron out. Like you said, I don't think I've done enough to quite figure out like the sort of the exact problems that I'm talking about. I think I've got a lot
Yeah,
of kind of background kind of lore, but not enough actual kind of character level
got you.
understanding.
Yeah, like embedding the character and their kind of narrative in the ideas, so that like those things are kind of, I guess, like mutually reinforcing in a way.
Yeah. I think I'm going to be doing more on Substack, to be honest. I think that's going to be my focus for the kind of near term. And I'm really enjoying it. I'm really enjoying it. And I like, it suits me that actually that there are these multiple possibilities. I think I'll do some audio. I've just done some audiobook narrations for someone else. So I think I'll do some audio stuff on here and see how that goes. But this kind of thing's super fun as well. So I don't know. Like, we'll see.
Yeah, let's see where it goes, mate. Yeah.
Anyway.
Cool. All
All
right.
right. Have a delightful Sunday.
You too, mate.
See you
Cheerio.
later. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye.